Albert Sidney Johnston bled out in 14 minutes from a bullet behind the knee. He had a tourniquet in his pocket, didn't use it, had sent his personal surgeon off to treat federal prisoners an hour before. By 2:30 p.m. on April 6, 1862, the Confederacy's best field commander was dead in a peach orchard in Tennessee, and with him died any real chance of reversing the war in the West. The Battle of Shiloh, 2 days in early April 1862, along a muddy steamboat landing on the Tennessee River, cost 23,746 casualties, more than every previous American war combined. It killed the illusion that this would be a short conflict. The Union Army of the Tennessee under Ulysses Grant, caught unprepared in their camps 22 miles from the rail junction at Corinth, Mississippi, nearly got shoved into the river and annihilated. They held by the thinnest margin. Reinforcements arrived after dark. The next day they counterattacked and drove the Confederates back to Corinth. But the price was a landscape you could walk across, stepping only on bodies. That's not metaphor. Grant wrote it himself. You need to understand what Corinth meant. Henry Halleck called it the vertebrae of the Confederacy, and he wasn't exaggerating. 2 railroads crossed there, the Memphis and Charleston, running east-west from the Mississippi to the Atlantic, the only continuous rail link the South had, and the Mobile and Ohio, connecting the Gulf Coast to the Ohio River Valley. Loose Corinth, and you cut the Confederacy in half. Isolate the Trans-Mississippi. Starve the armies in Virginia. Richmond and Corinth, Halleck said, were the 2 greatest strategic points of the war. He was building an army to take it. Grant's force, 6 divisions, though only 5 were on the field at the start, sat at Pittsburgh Landing, waiting for Don Carlos Buell's Army of the Ohio to march overland from Nashville. The plan was Jominian, mass superior numbers, 75,000 men, grind Corinth into dust through weight and logistics. The campsite itself violated every rule in the book, a plateau rising 100 feet above the Tennessee River, bordered by creeks on 3 sides, but with a deep, unfordable river at the Army's back. No entrenchments. Sherman thought digging in would make his green troops defensive-minded when they needed to learn how to attack. Grant telegraphed Halleck on April 5th, "I have scarcely the faintest idea of an attack being made upon us." Johnston had other plans. Desperate after losing Forts Henry and Donelson in February, defeats that turned the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers into federal invasion highways, he scraped together 44,000 men from garrisons at Pensacola, Mobile, anywhere he could strip troops. His second-in-command, PGTT, Beauregard, wanted to hit Grant before Buell arrived. Classic Napoleon. Defeat in detail. The Confederate march from Corinth, starting April 3rd, was a logistical disaster. Yellow mud, troops firing rifles to test them in the damp, bugles blowing at random. Beauregard wanted to attack April 5th, but the delays pushed it to Sunday the 6th. He argued for a boarding. Grant would be entrenched to his eyes. Johnston famously replied, "I would fight them if they were a million." The Union divisions at Pittsburgh Landing were a mix of veterans from Donelson and raw recruits who'd never heard a shot fired. John McClernand's 1st Division held the center, had seen action before, WHL Wallace's 2nd Division. Solid, experienced, would end up holding the critical position that became known as the Hornet's Nest. Lew Wallace's 3rd Division sat detached at Crump's Landing 5 miles away, the so-called Lost Division that wouldn't arrive until after dark on the 6th. Stephen Hurlbut's 4th defended the Peach Orchard sector on the left. Sherman's 5th Division, camped furthest forward, near Shiloh Church, was entirely green troops who were about to get the shock of their lives. Benjamin Prentice's 6th Division, also raw recruits, sat near Sherman. Both divisions bore the initial Confederate onslaught. The Federal weaponry was a hodgepodge that complicated supply, but offered tactical trade-offs. Elite units carried 58 caliber Springfield or Enfield rifle muskets with effective ranges out to 500 yards, but plenty of Ohio and Illinois regiments still had 69 caliber smoothbore muskets or European cast-offs. In the dense woods and scrub oak at Shiloh, Visibility often dropped below 100 yards. At that range, a smoothbore loaded with buck and ball, one round ball plus three buckshot, worked like a shotgun, four projectiles per man, turning close packed Confederate formations into hamburger. The artillery was standardized and superior: 10-pounder and 20-pounder Parrott rifles, 3-inch ordnance rifles, 12-pounder Napoleons. Those rifled guns gave the Federals a range advantage that would prove decisive when Confederate batteries tried to reply and got dismantled before they could unlimber. Johnston's Army of the Mississippi used a four-corps structure that looked good on paper but required staff work nobody had practiced. Leonidas Polk commanded the First Corps on the left center, mixed experience. Polk constantly deferring to Beauregard. Braxton Bragg's Second Corps was the largest, disciplined but exhausted from the approach march. William Hardee's Third Corps formed the vanguard. Hardee was a tactician, wrote the infantry manual most of these men trained from. John Breckinridge's Reserve Corps was supposed to plug gaps, but got committed piecemeal instead. Confederate armament was markedly inferior. Large portions of Johnston's infantry carried smoothbore muskets, flintlocks converted to percussion, hunting rifles brought from home. The 6th Mississippi went into battle mostly with smoothbores and a handful of Enfields. The 4th Mississippi had Hall rifles, an early breech loader prone to gas leakage. This disparity forced Confederate commanders to order charges to within 50 yards to deliver effective fire, which meant more exposure to Federal artillery canister and rifle volleys. Confederate artillery was worse. Of roughly 115 to 120 guns available, only 13 were rifled. The rest were 6-pounder smoothbores and 12-pounder howitzers that got consistently outranged. In counter battery duels, Union Parrotts and James rifles could wreck Confederate batteries before they could even get into effective range. The Union presence at Shiloh ran entirely on steamboats. The Tennessee River was the lifeline. Contracted civilian vessels, shallow draft, wood burning, built for commerce, not war, side wheelers and stern wheelers. The former faster and more stable in current, the latter more nimble around snags. Few pilots knew the Tennessee's channels, especially during spring high water. The Army relied on civilian rivermen, whose loyalty and courage varied wildly. Some were effectively militiamen, others profit-driven contractors, who'd run at the first whiff of danger. The steamers consumed voracious amounts of fuel, up to 70 cords of wood per 1,000 miles. Establishing wooding stations along hostile riverbanks meant armed guards protecting woodcutters from Confederate guerrillas, a constant headache. Whether the Union Army was surprised at Shiloh became a political firestorm. The Chicago Tribune savaged Grant and Sherman for negligence, painting lurid pictures of soldiers bayoneted in their sleep. That was sensationalist garbage, but the strategic and tactical surprise was total. Despite skirmishing on April 4th and cavalry reports, Sherman and Grant remained convinced Johnston wouldn't leave Corinth. They assumed the Confederates were demoralized, incapable of offense after Donelson and Nashville. Analysis failure, not collection failure. No continuous entrenchment line. Pickets not pushed forward for adequate warning. Camps laid out for comfort and water access rather than defense. Sherman held the forward perimeter at Shiloh Church and aggressively dismissed warnings from subordinates. Colonel Jesse Appler of the 53rd Ohio reported enemy movement in the woods April 5th. Sherman told him, "Take your damn regiment back to Ohio. There is no enemy nearer than Corinth." That incident captures the tension between West Point professionals and volunteer officers, the regulars considered alarmist amateurs. The battle started because Colonel Everett Peabody disobeyed orders. Commanding the 1st Brigade of Prentice's division, unsettled by reports Prentice kept dismissing, Peabody acted on his own initiative. 3 a.m. on April 6th, he sent Major James Powell out with 3 companies of the 25th Missouri and 2 of the 12th Michigan on reconnaissance. Around 5 a.m., Powell's patrol collided with Confederate skirmishers from Major Aaron Hardcastle's 3rd Mississippi Battalion in Fraley Field. The firefight functioned as a tripwire. The noise alerted Union camps moments before the main Confederate battle line crashed through the woods. Without Peabody's insubordination, the Confederate assault might have caught the Union Army literally in bed, potentially destroying Sherman's and Prentiss's divisions in the opening hour. Peabody paid for his vigilance with his life, killed later that morning rallying his troops. Beauregard's attack plan called for waves. Hardee strikes first, then Bragg, then Polk, Breckinridge in reserve. The tactical objective was turning the Union left, driving Federals away from the river and their gunboat support, pinning them against the swampy ground of Owl Creek for destruction or surrender. At 6 a.m., the Confederate onslaught hit Sherman and Prentiss. Raw Union troops faced sensory overload. Many had never imagined. Ambrose Bierce, who arrived later with Buell's army, described it. The air was full of noises. To the right and the left, the musketry rattled smartly, followed by the musical humming of fragments. Sherman performed magnificently, despite his earlier negligence. Rode the lines, took a bullet in the hand, managed a fighting withdrawal that prevented total disintegration of the Union right. But the sheer weight, Bragg's and Polk's corps overlapping the Union lines, forced the Federals back mile by mile. Regiments like Appler's 53rd Ohio broke and ran, leading to scathing press attacks later. The 55th Illinois suffered over 250 casualties, heaviest of any Federal regiment in the engagement. On the Union left, Colonel David Stewart's isolated brigade on the extreme flank got hammered by Confederate forces attempting the turning movement. Stewart's men fought without artillery support for hours before running out of ammunition and retreating to the bluffs. By midday, the Union center stabilized in dense thicket and a farm road that became legendary as the Hornet's Nest. Elements of Prentiss's division, reinforced by W. H. L. Wallace's division, anchored there. Post-war historiography elevated the so-called sunken road to Thermopylae status, claiming Prentiss held a natural trench 3 feet deep against a dozen assaults. Modern scholarship challenges this. The road wasn't a sunken trench, just a farm track worn by usage, offering minimal cover. Letters from soldiers like Thomas Chin Robertson of the 4th Louisiana have been misquoted to support the myth. Robertson actually described a tangle of undergrowth blocking his view, noted he couldn't see the road's depth. The tactical reality was concentrated Union fire shattering Confederate assaults. The Confederates fed brigade after brigade into frontal attacks instead of bypassing the strong point, sustaining horrific casualties. General W. H. L. Wallace was mortally wounded here, shot in the head overseeing the withdrawal. Prentiss eventually got surrounded and captured with 2,200 men at 5:30 p.m. Prentiss was later hailed as a hero, but Wallace's division shared the sacrifice equally. Their stand occupied the Confederate center 6 critical hours, buying Grant time to build a final defensive line at the landing. At 2:30 p.m., the strategic trajectory shifted. General Johnston, personally directing attacks on the Confederate right to force the Union Army away from the river, was struck by a mini ball behind the right knee. He'd sent his surgeon to care for wounded Federal prisoners earlier. The bullet severed the popliteal artery. He bled to death in minutes, tourniquet in his pocket unused. Johnston's death created a command vacuum. Beauregard, operating from the rear at Shiloh Church, assumed command but lacked Johnston's situational awareness of the front. That pause allowed the Union left to stabilize, just enough to prevent the complete envelopment Johnston had envisioned. Throughout the day, Grant anxiously awaited Lew Wallace's 3rd Division from Crump's Landing, only 5 miles away. Wallace didn't arrive until after dark. The delay came from ambiguous orders and route selection. Wallace took the Shunpike Road, intending to hit the Confederate flank near Shiloh Church, unaware Sherman had been driven back. When a messenger finally intercepted him with news of the retreat, Wallace had to countermarch his entire division, 5,000 men and artillery on narrow roads, moving them to the river road to reach the landing. This lost division controversy haunted Wallace the rest of his life. He later achieved fame as author of Ben-Hur, but spent decades trying to vindicate his actions at Shiloh. By late afternoon, Grant's army was compressed into a tight perimeter around Pittsburgh Landing. But that compression favored defense. Shortened lines allowed massing the remaining artillery, over 50 guns along a ridge, supported by heavy 24-pounder siege guns intended for Corinth operations. The Union gunboats, USS Tyler and USS Lexington, took positions in the river, firing 8-inch shells into the Confederate advance. At 6 p.m., Beauregard issued the controversial halt order, stopping the Confederate advance. Lost cause proponents pilloried this decision, arguing victory was imminent. Analysis of the tactical situation supports Beauregard. His troops had fought 12 hours, were exhausted, disorganized, looting Union camps for food. To reach the landing, they'd have to cross the deep ravine of Dill Branch, facing a wall of artillery and gunboat fire. Bragg reported to Beauregard that there was none of the enemy to be seen, implying the Confederates believed the Union force had dissolved or crossed the river when actually they were massed in the shadows. The night of April 6th was pure misery. Cold rainstorms swept the battlefield, thousands of wounded lying in no man's land between the armies. The medical response at Shiloh marked a turning point. Dr. Bernard J.D. Irwin, acting medical director for part of the Union forces, established the first systematic tent field hospital on the battlefield using abandoned tents from captured Union camps. He organized a treatment center prioritizing care and shelter, significant evolution from ad hoc use of barns and churches. But the evacuation system was overwhelmed. The Sanitary Commission and Army Medical Corps were unprepared for 20,000 casualties. Wounded men piled onto river steamers like the city of Memphis that lacked beds, sanitation, sufficient surgeons. The Chicago Tribune described the intolerable stench at the landing where cowed stragglers mixed with the dying. The disaster spurred the Western Sanitary Commission to develop hospital trains with kitchen cars and medical staff and properly outfitted hospital ships, revolutionizing evacuation protocols for the rest of the war. Ambrose Bierce provided one of the most vivid accounts of the battlefield that night. He described woods catching fire from shelling, illuminating the dead in macabre light. I saw the bodies of the dead and severely wounded, their white faces, dimly discernible, were clammy and cold. He recalled the demons of the battlefield, swine feeding on the dead, creating a picture of war, devoid of romance, a theme that permeated his later fiction. While Confederates slept in captured Union camps, the strategic balance shifted. Don Carlos Buell's Army of the Ohio began arriving by steamboat. Throughout the night, steam whistles pierced the air as transports ferried Buell's fresh divisions across the river. By dawn, roughly 20,000 fresh troops from Buell's army and Lew Wallace's division had deployed into line. Grant now commanded over 45,000 effectives against Beauregard's fewer than 30,000 exhausted men. Grant dismissed the idea of retreat. When Sherman remarked, "Well, Grant, we've had the devil's own day, haven't we?" Grant replied, "Yes. Lick 'em tomorrow, though." At dawn, April 7th, the Union Army launched a coordinated counterattack. The offensive was echeloned. Lew Wallace on the right, Sherman and McClernand in the center, Buell's fresh divisions, Nelson, Crittenden, McCook on the left. The Confederates, expecting to mop up a defeated enemy, were stunned by the ferocity. Lew Wallace's division, eager to redeem its absence, drove Colonel Preston Pond's brigade from Jones Field. On the left, Buell's troops advanced through the Peach Orchard, recapturing ground lost the previous day. Beauregard tried stabilizing his lines, throwing reserves into counterattacks near Shiloh Church. Tactical fluidity defined the day. Positions like Water Oaks Pond changing hands multiple times. The disparity in numbers and fatigue was decisive. Confederate artillery, low on ammunition, and outranged by Union rifled guns, couldn't hold off the advance. By 2 p.m., Beauregard realized the battle was lost. He ordered withdrawal to Corinth, assigning Breckinridge to command the rear guard. Union pursuit was tepid. Grant's troops were exhausted. Terrain of mud and ravines discouraged rapid follow-up. The battle effectively ended with the Confederates limping back to Corinth, leaving the field and the victory to the Union. The butcher's bill was unprecedented. Union forces suffered 1,754 killed, 8,408 wounded, 2,885 missing or captured for a total of 13,047. Confederate forces lost 1,728 killed, 8,012 wounded, 959 missing or captured for 10,699. Grand total 23,746 casualties. That shattered the illusion of a short war. The sight of the battlefield left psychological scars on participants. Grant would never shake. Shiloh was the death knell for Confederate hopes in the Mississippi Valley. The Confederacy never again mounted serious offensive to recover Tennessee. Initiative passed permanently to the Union. The subsequent siege and capture of Corinth in May severed the Memphis and Charleston Railroad, breaking the east-west spine of the Confederacy. With the Tennessee River secured, the Union had a springboard for the Vicksburg campaign and eventual truncation of the Deep South. In the immediate aftermath, the press excoriated Grant. The Chicago Tribune and other papers accused him of drunkenness and incompetence due to the initial surprise. Immense political pressure fell on Lincoln to relieve him. Lincoln's response defined the future Union war effort. "I can't spare this man. He fights." That decision retained the one general capable of destroying the Confederacy, setting the stage for Vicksburg and Appomattox. The narrative of Shiloh has been shaped by lost cause mythology and early Park Commission agendas. The myth that Johnston's death or Beauregard's halt order cost the South the battle persists but dissolves under scrutiny. The Union defensive position evening of April 6th, backed by gunboats and heavy artillery, was formidable. Memoirs by soldiers like Sam Watkins provide the visceral human texture. Watkins described the transition from excitement of the initial charge to realization of the horror, noting, "I now knew this war would last and last and last." The Battle of Shiloh was a tragedy of errors that matured into a triumph of logistics and tenacity. It demonstrated the volunteer soldier, though green, possessed remarkable resilience. For the Union, it validated the strategy of controlling the river and arteries of the South. For the Confederacy, it was a gambler's throw that failed, resulting in loss of their ablest field commander and permanent strategic dislocation of their Western defenses. Shiloh was the moment the Civil War shed its romantic veneer, the end of innocence and beginning of modern industrial warfare in America. As smoke cleared over Pittsburgh Landing, the nation realized the path to reunion would be paved with a magnitude of slaughter previously unimaginable.